All right, here we have concept question 1.18 from chapter 32, and they give us a table that shows production possibilities for both Malaysia and Ecuador, assuming there is no trade. Each number, they say, represents units of product produced per hour if all resources are fully employed. So, in other words, in this table, in Malaysia, every hour they produce 500 MP3 players, 900 shoes. And in Ecuador they could produce 400 MP3 players or 1,800 shoes. And that's all assuming that they're doing nothing but MP3 players or shoes. That's what it means by all resources are fully employed. So if Malaysia concentrates on doing nothing but MP3 players, they make 500 of them. If Ecuador does nothing but MP3 players, they make 400 of them. And similarly for shoes. So then they say, suppose workers in both nations work a 10-hour day and split their time evenly between producing the two goods. So they're splitting their time evenly, which means they're working 5 hours on each good, right? So the question is, how many MP3 players will we produce if both Malaysia and Ecuador spend 5 hours making MP3 players? The table tells us how many they can make per hour. So for Malaysia, if they spend 5 hours making MP3 players, they're going to produce 500 each hour times 5 hours. So I'll pull up my calculator here, figure out what that is. 500 MP3 players per hour times 5 hours gives me 2,500 MP3 players is how many Malaysia will produce. The question, though, asks for the total world output. So they want to know total, add Malaysia's to Ecuador's. So we know Malaysia will produce 2,500, and then Ecuador, similarly, they're going to produce 400, and they're going to do that for 5 hours. And so I've got to also add to my 2,500, 400 times 5 hours. For how many Ecuador is going to make, which is 2,000. So I'll add Ecuador's 2,000 to Malaysia's 2,500. So again, all I do is take the amount. They tell us that the table gives us the units of the product produced per hour. And then they told us that they'll be working 10 hours a day, but splitting their time between the two goods. So for 5 of those hours, they're making MP3 players. So I'll take the number that Malaysia can produce in 1 hour, multiply it by 5 hours. That gives me how much Malaysia will produce in 5 hours. Same thing for Ecuador. And then since they asked for the total world output, I just need to add together the number that Malaysia makes and the number that Ecuador makes to give me the total output. And with my calculator, I find that that is 4,500 MP3 players. 4,500. So I'll do the same thing for shoes. So it says 10 hours a day. They're splitting their time evenly. So they'll work 5 hours on MP3 players, and the other 5 they'll work on shoes. So I'll just take what the table tells me is the number of shoes they can produce in 1 hour, and I'll multiply that by 5 hours. So Malaysia produces 900 shoes in 1 hour. Multiply that by the 5 hours that they'll be working on shoes, and Malaysia's making 4,500 shoes. Ecuador similarly can make 1,800 times 5 hours, 9,000 shoes. So I'll add to that the 45,000 or 4,500 from Malaysia, and the total world output of shoes is just how many Malaysia makes plus how many Ecuador makes is 13,500. So I'll put that in here and check it. Good job. Now, they ask us if Malaysia specializes in MP3 players and Ecuador specializes in shoes. So now Malaysia is going to spend their whole 10 hours working on MP3 players, and Ecuador is going to spend their whole 10 hours working on shoes, rather than splitting the 10 hours into doing each. So the country is going to specialize in one product over the other. So now the question is, how many MP3 players will we get? So now Malaysia is making all the MP3 players. Ecuador's not making any, so we'll just take how many Malaysia, let me clear out my calculator here. we'll take how many Malaysia can make per hour, 500 MP3 players, times how many hours are they working on MP3 players. Now they're specializing. They're not making any shoes, so they'll spend their whole 10-hour day working only on MP3 players. So if they make 500 an hour and they're doing it for 10 hours, they'll make 5,000 MP3 players. And then similarly, the same question for shoes. Now we look at Ecuador. Ecuador is the only country making shoes now because they're specializing in shoes. And they can make 1,800 shoes in an hour. And now since they're specializing, they're spending their whole 10 hours on shoes. So I'm going to take that 1,800 and multiply it by the 10 hours they're spending, and they'll make 18,000 shoes. And since Malaysia's not making any shoes, that's our answer. The total number of shoes is just however many Ecuador makes. Check that, and we're good to go. So the point here, what it shows is that when the countries specialize in whatever they're really good at, we actually end up with a better situation overall in the world. So when both countries were making both products, splitting their time, we only had 4,500 MP3 players and 13,500 pairs of shoes. But when the countries realize, hey, Malaysia is really good at making MP3 players and Ecuador is really good at making shoes, so what if we just specialize in what we're good at? We can make even more of each product, and then we can just trade. We can sell, Ecuador can now sell shoes to Malaysia, and Malaysia can sell MP3 players to Ecuador, and everybody wins. So that's the point here with this question. Hope that helps. If you need more assistance on this type of question, stop by office hours or shoot me an email, and we'll talk through it further.